Welcome to Revolution Radio with Scott. I am Jay. So we got a lot to get to today. We're going to talk about the January 6th Commission. We're going to talk about the production of petroleum in our country. We also got to talk about the black fungus and how it pertains to COVID, uh, India, and the situation they're dealing with over there. We also have a little bit of fan interaction, some stuff that we did from the show last week where we were talking about the UFO sightings and some of the implications of that. But first, we're going to talk about something that's a very hot topic, something that I can, for some reason, not get away from critical race theory. And, like, I've been seeing a lot about this, and I've kind of taken a two-pronged attack with it. Namely, how does this affect normal life, and what is the ideology behind any of it? Essentially, there is a push for teaching critical race theory in schools, and each curriculum is different. I have looked through a multitude of curriculums, um, each with their own definition. The actual effect in people's lives depends honestly on the curriculum that is being spelled out for them. For the most part, we're seeing all conservative governors um, do executive orders to ban the teaching of critical race theory. And I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. And I want to be clear that I definitely believe in nuance. And so I'm not going to be on the side of critical race theory. Yes, yay, yay, I'm pro critical. I want to see the curriculum. I want to see exactly what they are talking about before I jump on board completely. The only critical race theory that I'm super familiar with is the classic definition of it, which basically goes like this, and it is that systemic racism is a bigger threat to a minority group than a racist individual. And with that statement and that belief, I 100% believe that actually. And I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm bothered by the fact that either that definition isn't getting enough exposure or that people maybe don't believe it. I don't know. I think it's a good thing to say, hey, racist Joe down the street isn't as much of a problem as banks and police, and whatever big, larger institutions having, a racial bias. And I will say, too, like the idea of, okay, well, we're not going to teach any of this, I think is kind of ridiculous. Partially because I don't believe that we have as much systemic racism now. I think it's still a problem. Sure, I'll give that to him. I think we have more of a classist systemic issue, meaning those of us who are considered middle class or lower class are we're going to be attacked more. We're not going to get the same opportunities, the same privileges, the same benefits as the richer people. And I believe
And we're going
that
to bear the brunt of the taxes too.
yeah, yeah. I truly believe that that is a bigger issue that's going on now. But I also think you learn a lot about that form of attack on people by also learning about what happened in our past with systemic
Absolutely.
racism. And so, yeah, I don't know why they.
Absolutely.
Well,
Well, can
I'm
I
kind of
say
glad
that
you're
one
on
thing
board with
with
that.
that history, that's one issue that I see critical race theory has been applied to in order to not rewrite history, but exclude history from certain curriculum. For instance, there was some curriculum that excluded uh, some of the slavery topics, and by no means were these, positive for any of the old white slave owners or anything else, but that it triggered African American students emotionally, so they removed it. And anytime you remove our history is a bad thing. It's like tearing down some of those statues. Were some of those old Southern generals racist? Yep. But were the statues of Booker T. Washington, was that racist? Booker T. Washington, they tore those things down. It's like they just mad at the old people,
Well,
people from
they
the
don't get
past.
we don't get statues anymore. The entire country.
Yeah,
We need
they
to take
were
all the
applying
statues
that kind
away.
of erasing history to critical race theory because it gave people an emotional response. You should have an emotional response to history. You should have an emotional response to truth and learn from history and learn from truth, not hide it because you're afraid of feelings.
I agree. I mean, but I think that's the issue when we're seeing places like Oklahoma who are saying that the white kids are feeling like they're feeling negatively infected by this being told that potentially their forefathers were slavers, and it affects them negatively, and so they don't want to teach it. Some of
Or do you
these,
mean Oklahoma, their forefathers were racists that burned
hmm
down the thing?
not just
'Cause-
that, although that's a really important point too, but not just that, but I mean the actual, being slave owners, white kids in general. Like I'm seeing this in about every Republican state that they're banning. They're calling for to stop teaching critical race theory, or to not ever even teach it because it's painting white people as being villains, and it's making the white kids feel. Um,
and there has been curriculum that pretty much states those exact things, and also that basically people of color can't be racist, which is the most ridiculous thing possible to even tell people. Instead of teaching people anybody can be racist, here's what racism has done in the past. We need to learn all this so we don't ever repeat these things. And by no means does anyone ever think that, oh, well, we could just flip back to slavery. Right. Yeah, that would work. But teaching, not teaching or teaching the opposite of that and teaching separate groups of children, separating them by race so they get their own story time, specifically aimed at them for a story. You read all the kids a story about the kid from Africa. You read all the kids a story kid from Venezuela. You know what I mean? You don't separate them. You know what I
no,
mean? It's just
no, and I think it's weird too because it's predominantly as I'm watching this stuff. Um, specifically, I got to be honest, coming from the right, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff from like Tucker Carlson and Stuart Varney and all these guys who are talking about we shouldn't be teaching this kind of stuff. Well, again, I want to know exactly what curriculum they're referring to. Are they referring to the fact that
right,
we shouldn't be teaching
right.
um, systemic racism? Because that's ridiculous. So 100% we should. There's a lot of people in our generation, Scott, that don't know what redlining is. They have no idea. I mean,
Right.
I've asked a ton of. In fact, we did this on Right of Center podcast. I went around the room. Nobody actually knew what redlining was.
Right.
I mean, do you know?
It
I'm putting you on the spot
no.
now. It,
Yeah. No, I don't.
exactly, and because it was never taught to us. And redlining is something that's happened to my family. My quick little story here. My grandparents, they went to church. Big church people, love the church. And my grandpa was the first Mexican business owner in this town. And so a lot of people at the church really liked him, and they, kind of got. He also was in the military, and so, he had what they call cursil, which was where they would teach Bible, but then they would also like drink and smoke, which is kind of funny. Um,
It's Catholic. Come on.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, uh, through hard work and everything else, my grandpa went to go buy a house, or been looking to purchase a house, I should say. Um, and there was also someone else who was in at the church, a white couple, and they were looking to buy a house. And the white couple, the wife didn't work, and the husband was a gas station attendant. My grandparents, my grandma was a nurse, and like I said, my grandpa he ran a drill press and he owned his own business. when they went to the bank to get a loan, they were given next to nothing. This white couple who was definitely lower class, I mean, they got triple
Lower income.
lower income. Yes, I know it's not. I know it throws me off. You say middle class, upper class, but you don't say lower class. It throws me off. But yeah, I mean, and the interesting story about that is though is so the the few houses that were on the market, there was basically like a studio apartment, and it had a bathroom, a kitchen, and then one big like living area. That was the house my grandparents ended up buying. It was the only thing they could get. That house to this day is worth like $35,000. Um, the white couple though, who by the way, like I actually really, fuck it, I'll say it. I love those people, the white people. I know them, like they're friends of the family. Well, one of them is still alive, the other one passed away. But their house is, and this is the house that my grandparents would have bought. It's worth $200,000. And the reason why that's important is because this happened to minority groups all over. They weren't given loans for houses and not be based upon their income
Right. You
because
had
they're
some
again.
bank owners saying, "I'm not going to give these dirty Mexicans
Mhm,
a loan."
exactly. And one of the big reasons why that's so important too is because in America, and Scott and I have actually talked about this, the best way to produce any sort of wealth in this country is to own land. And so if you go back decades and decades and your family, because they were a different ethnicity, couldn't produce wealth, that would explain why you're not as successful in a form. Maybe you didn't have that same upbringing. I mean, I know I
It's
had.
for sure one of the factors.
It is without a doubt. I mean, I know I have cousins, and I mean for us, we were some of the first generations that, and again, not my immediate family, but the first generations people who went to college. And my family was a little bit luckier because some of us did go to college, or some of our I should say, like my parents, and you know, they went to college, so there was somebody to teach you. But if you're the first generation of your family to just go to college, it's hard because you don't know how to do it, and no one's there to teach you and to help you. Same thing, like if if your dad is a big shot lawyer, or I don't know if you're part of the Kemper family and you're now a KKK queen, you have that help.
Did
Sorry,
they have
taking a
queens?
I was taking a shot at Ellie Kemper. Sorry, but no,
Okay.
no, off track, completely off track there. But so I think that's important. We should teach about that kind of thing because that existed, or like when my mom was a little girl, she always tells a story when she goes to buy candy at the corner store. The attendants there would not hand her change back; they would throw it at her because they didn't want to touch a Mexican. That kind of thing is important to know, to like just to be like, oh no, that never happened. And that's where I
Right. Yeah.
see a lot of this, like, oh, we're just not going to teach about it. And I think that's, just to touch on this real quick, Scott, is like we have people like in Texas, we have the governor saying we're not going to teach about racism. We're not going to teach about go. We're also not going to teach about the systemic racism that has held these people down. We're also going to skip some slavery, but we're still going to talk about General Lee. We're still going to talk about why that goddamn Confederate flag is so fucking important, even though it was only relevant for 4 years. And I'm supposed to look at this and go, yeah, they're not racist. Like how do you do that? Like how do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, if they're excluding any history, but let me say on the bank thing, sometimes to me, obviously these days, if someone has the last name, Roshenko or has the last name Gutierrez, I don't think I think some things are so automated these days, and the fact that if you can prove, which it's not that hard considering all these records have to be released to you upon request, that you've been discriminated against based upon your name, and that your financial holdings and your credit rating and everything else is better than someone else who got a loan. Like Fact Finder 12 goes in and takes two
Right.
people like
Yeah.
that and does And you're either going to find the racism bit on the loan officer there locally.
Oh yeah,
You know what I
yeah. No,
mean?
no.
That's more likely today. Now, in the past, I could see that, they're calling in the information and some other person up the chain give a shit what the numbers are. He's just doing it to help out, anybody but, anybody who has a name that doesn't sound, Greco-Roman.
right.
But today I would see that the racism would actually be on the loan officer, and that's very
No,
dangerous for somebody's job.
you're 100% correct there, and that's why I said at the beginning when I said I don't think systemic racism is as big as a problem now, as I see systemic classism is a problem now. If you come in and maybe you're wearing blue jeans with some holes in them and you have a Trump hat on, there's probably a good chance you're not going to get the loan that the nice looking black guy is coming in to get, and you guys
I would absolutely
and you
agree.
guys maybe make the exact same amount of money. That's 100. Yes, for sure. um and too interesting, because one of the things that gets brought up here as well, the Asian people, they got through it. Well, a lot of people don't know is like what is considered like Chinatown and places like that. They cut the government off. Like, you couldn't go in there back in the, like, we're talking like the 50s, 60s, 70s. Cops didn't go into Chinatown. Like, they did it right, basically. You had a lot of people who played ball, the Mexicans and the blacks, and they played ball. Well, let's just keep giving, and we'll keep trying to comply with the law. And one of the stories about like the redlining in the housing situation, like my grandfather, the house that he bought, and he went and he wanted to add a room onto it, and he had the guy out to look at it. He said, yeah, it's fine, go ahead. He did that. Well, lo and behold, about 5 years later, my grandpa was like, okay, well, it's a 2-bedroom house, I want a 3-bedroom house, I want to build a shed out back. And guy come out and he says, yeah, I mean, everything looks like it's up to code, look like you can do it. You just have to have a license to do it. And it was a $10,000 license. And that's another way that when you play ball, they'll regulate you to death, and they won't let you build your wealth that way. And I think, when we talk about like Chinatown and places like that, they just wouldn't let people in. Like, no, you want to check my house? No, you're not coming in. Like, it got really smart that way. They were able to do it. But I think that's the cornerstone for the systemic classism that we see today. When somebody like you own your own house, Scott, you want to build it up, you want to make it better. They say, no, we don't want that guy to build wealth. We don't want his property to gain, because we've got the hedge firm over here who owns the houses next door. We don't want those to lose value compared to his house. And even though it's not targeted at you, it still kind of is. And
Oh, sure.
you know,
The city can do what they, plus the city can kind of just eminent domain. We had a friend of ours who lost his house and had to take, quote, their market value on a house because they were putting new city infrastructure through that way. I mean, it was just like, this is the money you're going to take, and you don't have a choice. Leave.
you're right, yeah. But no, I don't know. That's the thing. I've been seeing this stuff about ban critical race theory. I don't think that's a good route. I really don't. I think, again, everything has nuance. You shouldn't be pro anything or anti
Yeah, if there
anything.
was a definition
Like,
of what the mission statement was for critical race theory,
yeah,
it would probably help people decide. But everyone, and what I've seen is some of the schools that are already teaching this. And by the way, I sent you a link to, what was it? Well, I remember what state that was in, but there were parents extremely upset about not only the critical race theory, but some of the books that were being given to a lot of sexual connotation to it. And they were upset, and rightfully so. But a few of the people who were screaming at the city, the school board, this was a bigger city, so it wasn't little. There were some black women up there screaming against critical race theory because they didn't want their children taught differently or taught to hate their white friends or hate, you know what I mean? And they were upset, and they were specifically yelling about that.
So yeah, no, and I saw that, but that's the thing that bothered me and made me say, and this is definitely a privileged position to take. But look, I'm not fully white, so I can make some comments like this. But I don't think that black woman knew what she was talking about, to be fair. Because there
I
again,
think they
and I
had
think
seen some of the
I think
curriculum, but like I said, you could have one curriculum that's ridiculous and absolutely inappropriate, and then another curriculum laid out, maybe the school or the school board handed parents and said, this is what is our critical race theory mission statement, and this is what we're including in our curricula for these age groups. But they're
fair
not doing
enough.
that.
I mean, I've seen some stuff brought up, and I've looked into it, and some of it has a bad name to it, and then you look into it and you're like, oh, I get what they're talking about. But for the most part, the definition of critical race theory is the fact that systemic racism is a more negative impact than individualized racism. And I actually think that that's a step forward, and I'm kind of surprised that isn't being more receptive to say, yeah, the government or the banks or the blah 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 being racist is a bigger problem than Joe the racist down the street. You know what I'm saying? Like that actually would say, hey, you know what? Yeah, maybe some white people, very few are racist, but you know what? Who cares? That's not going to affect you. You should be railing against the system. You see what I'm saying? Like I actually think that that's a
Yeah,
step towards
if
to
that was
recovering.
yeah, and who wouldn't disagree? You'd probably have Tucker on your side if that was how they were saying, like, the infrastructure in the past was horribly infested and against, people with certain names or skin colors. It's not as bad now.
I would hope, but the thing, like, the reason why I'm not sure is because that's literally what critical race theory means. Like, that's the definition. That's how it was broken down. That's where it gets its origin. So whatever people are talking about with it, again, I think the curriculums are important. But even with Tucker, for instance, he never broke down the curriculum. He never. So it's like, what do you know that you're maybe not teaching? The other thing, okay, let me give you this. Let me see what you think about this statement. This came out yesterday, and I'll read it kind of slow. And um, this is from Maxine Waters, and I want to hear what you say.
Oh, it's scary already.
Critical race theory is based on critical theory given to the world by Marxists from the Frankfurt School in Germany. When Hitler cracked down on them, they moved. They moved to Columbia University in New York, and they remain there to this day.
So you're saying Maxine Waters was basically, and I mean, Marxism is not a good thing. So, I mean, that's unusual that she would admit, that critical race theory comes from a Marxist background. I mean, they moved. Oh, okay. So you're saying they left what?
They left Germany under prosecution from Hitler. Hitler didn't like it, so they moved to New York.
Right, and as many Jews left as they could, and as many. I mean, who the hell didn't want to get out of Germany at that point?
Okay, so take it from that statement, though. Is critical race theory good or bad?
I would say if it's a Marxist idea, that's not a positive.
I mean, let's be fair. But Hitler also was against the idea.
Hitler hated a lot of shit. I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, he was trying to purge anything that wasn't in alignment with the new Aryan, overthrow of the world.
Right. Okay.
He hated everything. If there'd have been a capitalist party there, he would have got rid of them too. I mean, everybody was running from Hitler.
He didn't
I'm not.
like he didn't like it because yeah, it taught that racism existed essentially. And here's the problem though, that wasn't Maxine Waters, that was actually Chuck Woolery. You know, the old game show host?
Chuck,
Yeah,
Chuck Wooler.
yes. When you
Well,
read that though,
like I said, I
you
think that
go,
statement was rather benign. It was kind of like Hitler didn't like it, so they moved away. Oh, okay.
and now they
It's
live
not a
in New York.
defense or an attack.
I tend to think that it's an attack because he is anti-critical race theory, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of this, but he is big
I don't
old
keep up
like.
with Chuck Woolery too often.
Okay, fair enough. So Chuck Woolery, big old like, he's the definition of like a boomer. Like he's tweeting
Isn't he a game show host?
he's like retweeting Stuart Varney crap all the time, and like he is on that like Fox News drip, loves it always. And so yeah, okay, take that into context. And now critical race theory is based on critical theory given to the world by Marxists from Frankfurt School in Germany. And when Hitler cracked down on them, they moved. Yes, they moved to Columbia University in New York City, and they remain there to this day.
Well,
I mean,
America
like,
is a home for all ideas, but I mean,
my big issue with that too is like, yeah, I'm a big fan of like, you know, fusion energy. Like, I'm a big fan of a lot of things that came probably from Nazism, but that doesn't mean anything.
well, we're a big fan of things that we either recovered or that, like, for instance, I don't know, Einstein and maybe,
That's exactly where I was
all,
going with it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we've benefited from all ideas and all people, especially people escaping the grasp of the Third Reich. But like I said, it's a little bit benign. But I see how Chuck Woolery's saying it. It's like, well, Hitler got rid of it. Okay.
Yeah, I
That
know. So it's
sounds,
like, are you saying that then we should get rid of it to be like
yeah. No,
Hitler? Like,
it's like, well, Hitler also, he was gassing people, and so, and those people. Yeah, that's just he's an idiot.
exactly right. Oh, and okay, here's one other, and here's
And
the
so now what you're saying is Maxine Waters could have said something as stupid, and I would have believed it because she
yes,
does say dumb
yes,
shit.
that's exactly it. I actually was trying to trap you, but you're not far right. You're not right wing enough anymore. I think some of
I'm
my
not.
poison has affected you. When I do like the
No,
right
no,
of
no.
center,
I've never been. Look, I grew up in a house where my father told me point blank because I had this hot Filipino girlfriend when I was in college that he didn't want any slant-eyed Asian babies.
holy
So
Jesus.
So trust me, I've experienced racism directly through me. Hell, I got when I was working before I went to college. My black boss, who was half black and half Native American, maybe a little more black than Native American, but he had access to the reservation. He had access to federal programs. He was a hard worker and a badass. I loved Barry so much, and he basically wanted me to take over management for him. And when he was ready for me to fill out the management, by the way, I did get the job, but when I was filling out, and this was 1997, somewhere around there,
Hmm.
when I was filling off, said, do not put white in the box. Check mixed race because our company is not hiring white people, and I want you to have this job. So my black boss, and the test was innocuous bullshit, like, do you smoke crack on Wednesdays? No, I don't. Do you smoke crack on Thursdays? Yeah, probably Thursday. It was one of those dumb question tests they just use to exclude people that they don't want to give a chance. But I got the job because I took direction from him because there was affirmative action hiring going on, and he wanted me to have that job.
I would be
So,
curious if you did mark yes on the correct. Like if they're like, well, all right.
He's being honest
Yeah.
because I did smoke absolutely tons of pot back there. It was an arcade place. So definitely, I smoked a lot of drugs back there, but it usually just green stuff. But the point of it is to think that white people don't see racism and that it affects other people's racism affects them in a negative way is crazy.
Oh, it is.
I've definitely
Completely.
dealt with racism aimed at me or through me or seen it first class or somebody discriminated. My best friend was a Syrian guy all through high school. Now, I didn't ever see anybody fuck with him because he was the captain of the soccer team and homecoming king and all that kind of stuff. But you know what I mean? It's just like if I'd ever seen somebody say something to him like rude, I would have lost my mind.
No, and I
But
think that's like you make a great point, and also to say that I think a majority, and honestly, like throwing in my brown card here, I hang out with when I hang out with minorities and we talk about race, we usually don't. But the thing is, like the one thing that we all agree on is we know that the majority, we're talking 90% of white people, are allies. And like the thing that gets me, and it was actually brought up by a black friend of mine. He was talking about Lori Lightfoot. Do you know who she is?
yes, I do.
Okay, so yeah, governor of Chicago, and this was. I'm really bashing Stuart Varney here on this segment, but this was brought up by Stuart Varney, and he was really really upset about this because so Stuart Varney did a piece about her, and you know it was a really quick little clip, and all he really said was that Lori Lightfoot has now said that she will not take any interviews from white heterosexual white males. And then he went on to how this is racist and this is sexist and this is a problem, blah 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 blah. And I was listening, and I was like, well, actually, I kind of agree with Stuart Varney. And Josh is his name, and Josh is, dude, why don't you look into it? And okay, cool. Checked it out, and sure enough, yeah, it enraged me because the fact is that's true. She did say that, but for one day out of her four
Yeah,
years,
I did see
she
that
was
it was
not.
one day.
Yeah, and it's like,
It
why?
probably
Why
was
is
the
this
10th story that I finally read that said it was for one day.
right? And
But
they're lying to you. But here's the thing. Let me go into why this is a problem and why he found it a problem. I find it a problem is because that was the big thing that everyone was talking about. Apparently AOC and Ilhan Omar are not causing enough problems anymore, and they've moved on to this person being the big problem. And the issue is, though, is Lori Lightfoot, that thing about not talking to the journalists for one day, which again, like you said, after 10 stories, they finally highlight that part. Um, she's under massive criticism for for fraud and for embezzlement. There is a black lower income activist group who's trying to get a facility built in the inner city of Chicago, and they know that there was at least $12 million that was budgeted for that facility group, and that $12 million is just gone. And she
that guy was on Fox, by the way. On there's a black reporter on Fox that interviewed him, and that's some bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's my issue is I I'm not going to say, "Oh, don't go after Lori Lightfoot. She's a black woman. We shouldn't." No. I'm saying don't go after her on stupid crap. That is a big thing. And she's actively like hurting, inner city, lower income, majority black children. And like the facility itself sounds like it would be amazing. It would offer health care, um, educational benefits, a lot of things. And she maybe embezzled $12 million, but they're not talking about it. And it's kind of being whitewashed away because they keep jumping on these dumb stories. She won't talk to white males. And it's like, come on. Like it's fraudulent not fraudulent. It's lazy, to be honest. It's just lazy.
Well, it's clicks because even if it's a one day racism bit, it's going to get more clicks than a story that they've probably run in the past and hasn't gone anywhere. It's like keeping people's attention for you've got to get their 15 minutes in, and since yeah, it's just not as a outrage of a story. That's the difference. It's like people are
Speaking,
more outraged by that than they would be of her obviously guilty of embezzling money and doing, and she's horrible for the community, but nobody seems to, except some of what are the individual people who run, what are they called? I don't want to say generals, the people who
okay,
run,
yeah,
you know what I'm talking about?
yeah,
Certain
no,
parts.
I definitely get what you're saying. Yeah, but no, you're right. Although you bring up the click, the 15-minute attention, we are rapidly running out of time. I'm actually surprised that this debate wasn't even a debate, that you actually are on board. I hope more people look at critical race theory, though, and the racial thing in general in the same vein that you and I do, where there's nuance. We should teach our history. We should teach every part of our history. And I don't know. It bothers me that this is going. I'm sure we're going to talk about it more in the future. But anyway, we will be back. We are going to be talking about black fungus. Scott is going to educate us. I'm excited to learn more. It used to be my nickname in high school, so
What?
excited for that one.